My lived experience that helps me do that work with young men is being black and growing up in East Texas, which is very racist and very white.
Okay.
I am from geographically an area that is very racist stereotypically, and so the expectations are very culturalistic white, right? But then also the other expectations of culturalistic black are you're black, but you're not black enough, and you're also not white enough, and
Mm.
also your mother t taught you how to speak well was a cultural hindrance for me to grow up with those expectations from both sides.
What Casey is describing taps into a powerful aspect of the boy code, that unspoken set of societal rules that tells boys how they should behave and how they should feel. Often, boys receive confusing, mixed messages about what it means to be male. But as parents, there is so much we can do to protect their emotional world once we truly understand the pressures they face. That knowledge is what makes the difference between your son growing up as his authentic self or growing up feeling he needs to wear a variety of masks to protect his inner heart. I've detailed exactly how to begin this work in my free guide, 5 Pivotal Tips on Parenting Boys. One of the first things we tackle is how to protect that inner world from the very cultural hindrances that we're discussing today with Casey. You can download it for free right now at sonhoodcoaching.com in the resources section. Now, let's get back to the show. Welcome back to Unlocking the Parenting Code All About Boys. I'm your host, Kathy, and today I'm joined by Casey Muze. I usually read out the guest bio, but I have looked at everything that you do and everything that is referred to as your work or your passions, and I wonder if you would just explain better than me what it is that you do.
I tell people my name is Casey Muze. I am the bilateral specialist of rhythm accompaniment. And so that lends itself to be in a few really cool spaces. That lends itself for me to explore the healing components of those who are walking through their trauma journey. That also lends me as a music therapist to serve those individuals who are of the demographic of special needs and or neurodivergency, right? So I do a lot of correspondence in school districts to serve those specific individuals, whether it's autism, whether it's Down syndrome, whether it's ADD, ADHD, dyslexia, or dysgraphia, right? Yeah, that's who I am.
So, when someone is passionate about the path that they are on, and you seem to be passionate about yours, there's usually a story behind it that helped lead them into that direction. Like, I know that's true for me. Is there a
Yes,
story behind yours as well?
I feel like there are multiple stories, right? I feel like that story l- and quite foundationally starts with me being 2 years old and exploring pots and pans for rhythm accompaniment and for rhythm of what makes me feel good, right? Going through challenges. And the story truly that starts and opens that up is my mom, whenever I was two, I pulled pots and pans out. And what was really dynamic about this account is when I was playing or banging or whichever word you may choose to say, I explored pots and pans in the way that I was exploring the ringing or the resonance or the tone or the pitch of pots and pans and shifting my hand and moving my hand in different spaces. And her, as a lifelong educator, decided to let me explore pots and pans for an hour every single day. That was the very beginning of me understanding rhythm as a therapeutic component, right? And the immediate story of that connection was when I was 22 or 23, not really sure, don't really remember, but I was going through my own mental health journey, living alone. Well, not living alone, but living as an adult in an apartment with roommates that we weren't very close at that point in time in Dallas, Texas, and was going through depression and anxiety and was just in a place to where I was enamored with it all, and I was struggling so deeply to where every thought was a depressive thought or a struggling image in my head, and had reached the point where I had got up to pace or walk because I was pacing back and forth in my room, right? And I had found and remembered the really dear to my heart, and every drummer can empathize with this, is what's called a paradiddle. And I was chanting this paradiddle, which is synonymous with rudiments. It is right, left, right, right, left, right, left, left. But I was chanting paradiddle and breathing in the form of a box breath. And that was quite a turning point in exploring my depression and anxiety. And so that was the beginning of my formal exploration of rhythm as a therapeutic space, right? And years later, I find myself exactly where I am now. But yeah, that is one of many stories, right? And then you get to the story of how I became a person who aligned rhythm with trauma, right? And serving 10 years in a space of mental health and substance use treatment care for dual diagnosis work, which meant all of my clients had a mental health diagnosis and a substance use diagnosis. So they may be amphetamine use disorder and bipolar, right? For example, and going through and living in that space professionally, but then also reaching back to my bag of understanding music theory, music production, and sound engineering, and adding those nuances to the mental health component. And so that's how you get the trauma side of it, right? And then the mentor aspect is how I got the name Muse. I had six really wonderful mentors in my life who decided to randomly start calling me Muse, and they all spelt it with the Z, right? So one would say La Muse, one would say Ah Muse, one would say The Muse. And so different aspects of that, right? And so then you get the mentor, you get the trauma speaker, and then you get the music therapist out of all of those three components added together. Yeah,
If you're comfortable talking about it, I would really like to understand how substance abuse showed up in your younger years. And
sure.
then tied in with that, how did that, like having substance abuse, how did that impact your relationship with your parents?
Yeah. I'm not quite sure how substance abuse affected my relationship with my parents. So, substance abuse was truly a social dynamic in my life from a very young age, not a very young age, from late teenage years, right? I don't remember that I was introduced to weed. So I was introduced to alcohol by a good friend of mine in the form of beer, and enjoyed beer quite often as I walked down the street to his house, being in the social aspect of playing music, right? And so music and drugs always coincided, right? And then there was weed. And then when I went off to college to go to music production school, that's when the world shifted with me with drugs, because when I lived in my hometown, I DJ'd. And this was when EDM music or electric dance music was a thing that was introduced to the world, right? And then when I moved to Dallas, one of my main goals was to become a DJ in Dallas because it was just a new scene, it was a city. And so I wanted to achieve that goal, and I did. And then I also DJ'd in a time where the rave scene was really popular. And so ecstasy and Molly were a thing, and Skittles bowls, right? So I'm talking like people would pass around bowls with just a bunch of multicolored pills, and you don't know what you're getting. You just reach in and you take whatever you pull out and you can pass them around, right? And so I DJ'd clubs in Dallas that were this culture for a few years. And I stopped because I witnessed the effects of people pass out, get taken away in stretchers. And at that point in time, I had only personally used alcohol and weed. I used them quite frequently. Those two drugs are the only ones that I've ever used. And so to witness that energy and those experiences and that culture, I've never taken anything but those two drugs because of that, because I've seen that, right? And so the cool connecting point with that is my second demographic of service for substance use and mental health were adolescents, right? I spent 6 years providing outpatient treatment with adolescents who were either on probation or on CPS cases or any type of legal issues, right? And they got in trouble with substance charges or really aggressive charges, and they have possession charges or minor consumption charges, right? So the connecting point is that story and bridging the gap of telling that story and how it translated with my work of adolescent treatment, right? I know that my relationship with my parents has a very the connection with that is not so much present with my usage of drugs. My relationship with my mom is wonderful. We would sit down and we would have a beer from time to time together, right? And from time to time, we still do that, right? My relationship with my dad is not present. It's not there whatsoever.
Did they know, the environment that you were working with? Did they know that you were involved in any part of that?
No, not at all. I say that, right? I don't know. I mean,
But you
maybe.
didn't have the conversation with them.
I've never had that conversation with them. My
Okay.
my mom has a really unique way of knowing things without me knowing, right?
Yeah.
And I think moms have that energy anyway. My dad, for the life of me, did not know.
It seems almost a common thread, the personal experience with, our own son
Mhm.
and with young males that I've been speaking with in the last year. But it seems really common that there's a struggle that happens
Yeah.
in the late teens. There's when boys are becoming young men, but
Yeah.
they don't have that step where they know that that also means to put behind them the boyish ways. And there is a bit of a rebellion, I think, internal rebellion when they
Yeah.
leave home. So when they're in their late teens, their early 20s, if they're in college or university, and that time period, I mean, it's natural to explore. I understand
Hmm.
that, professionally and personally.
Yeah.
But to me, it seems more. It seems like there's something happening with young boys when they're in that stage of life where they are really questioning their identity, their sense of self worth,
Mhm.
their, outlook towards the future. And I have my own theories about it all, but in your work, because you work with a lot of young men as well, like
Uh-huh.
what's your take on that time period in general?
Yeah. Yeah. My take on that time period in general is boys don't always have other men that they are close to. they feel relatable to or related to enough to where they feel like there's a space of empathy created for them, right? They may have a father, but in this generation of boys, there's more of an emotional need than what there has been, right? And so they may have a father, which is great, but the gap of understanding the emotional connection and the emotional need may not be there, right? And so where it's always good to wake up in the morning and be hard and be rigid and just say, I'm gonna get these things done. But at the end of the day, it's always so good to say, I understand your emotional aspect too. And I understand that you went through these things, and I understand that it makes you feel sad. Or to simply say, I understand that I was hard on you, and this is why. And in that moment, blah, blah, blah. And I may have not understood how else to react to you. And this is why I did that. Can we go forward from here and have this conversation, right? That door for that conversation shifts a little bit more if that father or that mentor or that uncle or that whoever creates a space for emotional connection and need as well, right? And that's rough. That's hard. I know wh- the reason why, like, my dad lives 45 minutes in another town that is hop is skipping away from me, right? My last conversation with him was 5 years ago. And it was simply in a place of him not understanding my emotional needs. And I was grown. I'm 38 now, right? Do the math, right? And I was going through a circumstance in a time to where I didn't I didn't need him to be hard on me, or I didn't need him to have these expectations of walking in to the house because I was staying with him for a period of time to where I could create some energy and get back on my feet or create some things, right? And he was really hard on the physical expectations of doing physical things that were a little bit kind of surface level things that like he would get mad at me for doing things like walking in and not saying hi first, like the first thing. If I didn't say hi the first thing in the world, he would get so mad at me, right? And I get it. I also get that those things are very generational cultural standards, but they're not the things that I grew up with. and and this is a really hard story to tell because there's so many components to it. My parents are divorced now, and they had two very different viewpoints of raising me and my sister as we grew up, right? And so that was always really hard for, I think, them to communicate, right? I don't think it was really hard for me as a child. It didn't get hard until actually I was a young adult to understand, right? And so some of my distances and hardships with my father truly didn't happen until I was young. I was a young adult.
Like, still connected with substance abuse, because
Yeah,
I think it's a, you know, in my generation, it wasn't, there weren't so many, like you said, the bowl of goodies
yeah,
that are public.
right.
And when I first started becoming aware of that as an adult who had a young son, it was terrifying,
Yeah,
because whereas I might make a mistake in my youth, over drinking, or if if it was something else, but it probably wasn't going to be life threatening unless I had a car accident or
sure.
something like that. But today, young people who are just exploring, who are going through the natural rebellious stages, I think is what it is. It can end their life. And so it's
Yeah,
it's a very different world that that kids are growing up in now. that kids grew up in your generation and that kids grew up in my generation. So connect it with drugs is a it's a it's an interesting way to look at society and how it's developed. And so when I'm looking at men and young men, and you said that you're working with the combination of substance abuse and mental health issues, which I think that I would assume there is often a very strong connection between those two things and the reasons behind it. But
Yes.
what I'd like you I'd like to just understand some of the things that you came to understand even better about men and masculinity when you were working in the prison environment, because that's a very different environment.
When you talk about prison system work, right, is you almost have to look at there's a deepening and unlearning that they must do, but there's also a very stronghold because they've also lived that life and those habits and those tendencies for such a very long time, right? And if their brain has developed in such a way that that is where their maturation level is, they have to undo those circumstances. And that's a hard thing to do, right? Because you're almost telling them, in fact, you're exactly telling them, telling them the way that they've lived for such a long time is not appropriate for living in the expectations of life, right? Or it's wrong, which not saying those words because that's an offensive statement. And you also, in the world of therapy, nothing is wrong or right, right? And so even when you get used to speaking to boys or young men, opening up the door of saying and lessening the expectation of what is right or wrong and letting them be themselves and allowing them to understand that just because they made a mistake, it is automatically not attached to wrong, right? If that makes sense. And that's the same way when you're looking at older men, where you're looking at men in the prison system, when you're looking at boys, whether you're talking about substance use or mental health, right? There's specific dynamics that exist for when you're looking at mental health or substance use or both of them if they exist at the same time. And such as you said, Catherine, is oftentimes they do exist at the same time, right? No matter if you're talking about boys or no matter if you're talking about men. And the truth is, a lot of the times it's hereditary, right? So if you look at substance use issues or if you look at mental health issues, is right, it's a lot of times it's bloodline inherited, right? And you can see those physical traits show up really early in young boys, right?
Something I'm quite passionate about, and I read about it in work that you do as well. But
Yeah.
my theory is that one of the reasons so many of our young boys, not young
Mhm.
boys, older boys, young men, why
Sure.
they struggle so much is because we don't have anything like a rites of passage anymore. There is no
Mm.
clear line for them to understand you are moving into manhood. You know, you need to
Right.
leave the boyish ways behind. And here is a group of mentors who are
Yeah.
going to show you what that path looks like. Be there when are stumbling or whatever, but you're not alone and you're moving into manhood. And because we don't have those anymore, I think I think that's why so many young men and young boys fall back on really risky behavior, whether it's doing dumb things or
Mm.
it's getting involved in some with drugs or alcohol, whatever it is, to numb it out because they have to prove that they're becoming a man. So talk to me about rites of passages.
Rites of passages in what dynamic, right? Because rites of passages are great. I don't know that I think rites of passages are an absolutely beautiful thing, right? I think that they could be beneficial, and I think that they could be worthy of something unique in a lot of social settings. I don't know that rites of passage in blatant form or blatant introduction would be so much welcomed in a lot of social settings nowadays because the world has been so far removed from that idea, if that makes sense, right? I think that the idea of having some type of set up social space could be so brilliant, right? But if you look at the rites of passage in the space of, I don't know, maybe sports in some settings could be considered a rite of passage, that may be a bit loose. Maybe Boy Scouts of America could be set up as being a rite of passage, but then that also could be an example of the world being removed from that idea of rites of passage because now in this setting, in this day and age, even Boy Scouts is now turned into Scouts of America because it's right. They've now let girls into the Scouts of America, and so now that's a thing that is offensive in some terms, right? So unfortunately, I think that the world has reached a place to where traditional rites of passage and the way that it physically is set up may not be welcomed so easily. But I know that rites of passage are really good because they set up structure cognitively for young men to be and know that they are worth the value that they could exist in, right? And I don't know that I'm answering your question, but these are thoughts that absolutely make sense when you look at rites of passage, right? Is what does that look like now? How could that exist now? Right. So I guess my immediate thought with rites of passage is what could that look like now, right? And then my immediate answer to that could be, I mean, it could be Boy Scouts of America, but then that looks different, right? Could it look like a form of martial arts, right? Because martial arts could be a thing that is martial arts is one of these things that is so very traditionally founded still, right? That could be introduced to as an example of creating a rites of passage for young men, right? Then you still have to look at the social influences of what is cool. Is martial arts cool to young men now? I don't really know. That depends on where you live, right? That depends on these social expectations. Then you have to ask yourself, where do boys get their social expectations from? Where do men get their social expectations from? How do young men that are fathers or that are not fathers get social expectations that they bring down to younger men, right? And so forth and so forth and so forth, right? And then that's a different conversation because that opens up the door of where does the structure come from?
I started to really look into it when our son was, turning 13 and
Yeah,
spent, well, a good year researching it. And there wasn't that much information then. And
yeah,
I have no proof that whatever I did was of any value, but it couldn't hurt, is what I thought. And since that point, and so I created something for my son with a small group of men. But the concept, like there are certain aspects of a rites of passage
sure.
traditionally, and but like you said, in modern day, some of those either aren't appropriate or maybe wouldn't be well received or aren't hitting the target. And the target to
Hmm.
me really means too many boys, too many young men don't
Yeah,
feel connected. They don't have the role models on what it
sure.
means to be a good man, a good human in this society. And that's what, in my understanding, that's kind of the value behind
Hmm.
the rites of passage. So Australia has some brilliant work. And
Yeah.
often when it works, there's all different kinds, but it's like a father and son, and maybe they go out into
Mhm.
nature with, 10 other dads and their sons, and there's someone who organizes. But the whole idea is that a young boy feels he's part of a community and that he's supported and that his struggles are not just his struggles. So
Yes.
yeah, I think like for girls when they have their first menstrual cycle,
Hmm.
the expectations for them are different. People treat them differently, and they are part of the women's group. And it's just natural and it
Yeah.
is automatic. There is not such a situation really for young boys. Don't you do something with like mentoring, like a
I
retreat with
do.
young boys or something?
I do. So I have a mentorship program that I blend spiritual ideas and practices and principles with the awareness of mental health, with the awareness of physical, practical goal setting, right? And I do this from ages 13 to 22, but I also don't limit the age range so much because sometimes my clients go as young as 8 years old, right? Which is super young, but it's also super needed sometimes, right? And really, like really specifically, my clientele mostly in that program are young boys that don't have black fathers and they have white mothers, and they the mothers look to me as someone who understands the cultural needs for that son a little bit more deeper, right, than they can give them. And so I also end up giving practical advice and wisdom and words of understanding about what that young man is going to the mothers at the same time. Right. And so
So,
we do a,
sorry, can I just interrupt for a minute? Because I was going to ask you later on, because you said something about you had a lived understanding of standing between worlds. What
yes,
is your lived experience that helps you, doing that with that group of young men?
my lived experience that helps me do that work with young men is being black and growing up in East Texas, which is very racist and very white,
Okay.
and the
So your family
expectations.
itself is not like you're not from a bicultural
I
family. It's
know,
from your
yeah.
environment.
So I am not. I am from geographically an area that is very racist stereotypically. And so the
Okay.
expectations are very culturalistic white, right?
Yeah.
But then also the other expectations of culturalistic black are you're black, but you're not black enough, and you're also not white enough, and
Mm.
also your mother t taught you how to speak well. And so why are you speaking was a cultural hindrance for me to grow up with those expectations from both sides, right? And not having a father that understood those social expectations, but also having a mother that did understand them, but was my mother, not my father, right? Yeah. So I lived that dynamic of racial expectation or turned into cultural expectation, right?
So what is it that you do? Like, what is when you have that group of 13 to 20-year olds? Like, what's the goal of it? Like, what is it that how do they come out
The
different?
yeah,
When I was raising my son, I longed for a guide, something real, honest, and grounded in what boys truly need. So I created the book that I wish I'd had. Packed with tools and real world strategies that actually work, you'll learn how to nurture his emotional world and finally understand the feelings behind his behavior. Because boys don't need punishment, they need guidance. We'll bust the myths that keep boys boxed in and help you support him through the real challenges of growing up. Most of all, it's about transforming your connection, one small moment at a time. Raising boys who become remarkable men. Get your copy today and let's create a beautiful future together.
yeah, the goal is to add purpose and power and empowerment to their psyche, that they understand, but that they also understand where to find that within themselves. They know where to look. And also, what we do is we take the time to audit social circles, which is really important. So, we talk about these social expectations and surrounding yourselves with people that are going to allow you to meet your quote unquote short-term goals or long-term goals. They could be as short as, I just want to finish school this year, and as long as I want to go to college. Okay, cool. Let's figure out who can allow you to get there. And it doesn't have to be so rigid, right? Because goals take time, right? And so it could be as rigid as this person allows you to engage in the mindsets and perspectives that will allow you to speak life into yourself and believe in yourself, to develop the attributes and personalities that will get you to that next step into college, right? Or get you to finish this program that you want to finish, right? Or get you to the discipline and determination that will allow you to make the varsity basketball team next year, right? Yeah, so we look at all of those things in every young man that we have, right? Yeah, and so there's a conference that we do because I take members throughout the whole entire year, and so then we have the membership throughout the year, and then we have the conference that takes place in July, where all of the members that I've had individually, they meet there, plus individuals that I have not been a part of it so far, but they need the conference to get their feet wet and get understanding of what it's about and determine whether that's the only accounts that they want to have or they want to have continued fellowship. And so it's a really awesome program.
It sounds it. It really sounds it. And it ties well into what I would like to talk about next. The depression, anxiety, and suicide numbers in men is
Yes.
alarming. And
Yes.
I looked at
Yes.
statistics, particularly for the States, because that's where you're coming from. So in
Yeah.
2023, 49,000 people died by suicide in the States. And that's
Yes.
roughly one every 11 minutes.
Yeah. Yeah.
And 80% of those deaths are men.
Yeah.
So, how do you
And
interpret those statistics?
and the highest amount in the state of Texas come from Smith County, which is the county that I live in.
Oh, really? I didn't know that.
Yeah, it goes that deep. Yeah.
Okay,
The
so then you
highest
must have
amount,
feelings about this then.
the high, so yeah, yeah. So I'm gonna add some more statistics to that. The
Yeah.
highest amount come from Smith County, which is the county that I live in. The second highest amount come from Angel, or not the second, I'm so sorry. Somewhere within the fifth highest amount come from Angelina County, which is the county that I did all of my work in doing adolescent substance abuse and mental health treatment. So, yeah, for me, that number sucks. I don't know any other way to say it. It is just terrible, right? That number, in all honesty, I can't allow to enter into my psyche so much. It is a very realistic, it is a very true number, right? It exists, but I can't look at it and be so bogged down about it because if I do, I will be the Captain Saver person and go try to dismantle all of those numbers and I will end up burning myself out. What I look at is who is existing right in front of me on my caseload that I am working with right now, and how can I give them the best and most quality time and energy and words of wisdom as possible, and give them as much practical energy and information as possible. Those numbers are there and they're terrible and they're absolutely true, right? But what I'm looking at is the most important moment that exists is the moment that we have right now, right? And so if that moment is the most important moment that I have to focus on this conversation that I'm having with Jacob, or this conversation that I'm having with Josiah, or this conversation that I'm having with Benjamin, right?
I agree. I agree. And I understand. I feel very compassionate and empathetic about all of
Yeah.
those things. And I do think the most impact you have is whoever is sitting across from you. But there's
Yeah.
also another part of me, a more analytical part that wants to know why. Like, why is
Yeah.
this happening? Like what
Yeah.
and then if I know why, then maybe I
Yeah.
can help with become part of the solution.
That's a good thought. And that, so I do this speaking engagement called Holding the Line. And holding the line is actually really profound in putting energy into bridging the gap between people that provide for young adolescents, whether you are male or female. And there's a huge portion of it that is about understanding emotional intelligence. And part of the gap or the void that adolescents do feel is not being heard or not being seen or not being felt. And a lot of the reason why I did start mentorship is because there's so much information about what to do, but not so much about I hear you and I feel you. Can we have a conversation about what is in the inside versus what you do next? Because you may do what that person said next out of anguish only because you know that that's the right thing to do, that's next for you to do for your goal setting, right? But you feel unseen, unheard, untapped in, unfilled in the gap of doing it. And so many, you can't keep doing that over and over and over again, right? Especially as a young person, right? As a young man in this life, and you never get filled with your emotional wisdom, right? Or you never get filled with your empathy of, right, how you feel or what goes on in the inside or how you felt about the fact that your mentor did this or you failed a test or something, right? You can only do so much of put your bootstraps on and walk it out, right? Without having those conversations. And so holding the line is for resource providers, teachers, educators, after school program to understand what your role is and how you can also work with the other people that provide resources in the town, in the city, which for me is whatever town that I'm in. I also provide this nationally, but it's for those people who don't understand that there's such a gap and there's such a difference in the generations of the need for emotional wisdom and emotional talents and emotional practicality versus just the goal setting aspect or the physical get up and do the thing next.
You know, I've been looking into this area of the inner emotional world of boys for almost 30 years now. And in the last year, it's when I've really put a focus on talking directly, like not just my
Mhm.
son and his friends, although my son
Yeah,
is my best source of understanding
yeah,
about men. And in these conversations, so many times, like it is ridiculously too many times, these
yeah,
young men have said, well, no one's ever asked me about that, or no one has ever
sure.
talked to me about any of that. And they're so open and also so grateful to be asked. And I just
Yeah,
find that, you know,
yeah.
I thought I was doing the right thing too, getting all the information, sharing all the
Hmm.
strategies and all that
Yeah,
kind of stuff. But
yeah.
when do we really ask our boys and young men, like truly, you know, what's
Hmm.
going on? Like really
Yeah,
being curious about what's going on in there and why.
right, right. Yeah, I think why is a good, so who, right? And one of some of the things that I ask them is, who caused you to feel this way? And I don't ask them, why do you feel this way? But one of the things that I ask them is it fiction or is it fact? And then we separate, we define what is factual and what is fiction, right? A lot of times they're so hindered by gossip, they're so hindered by everything that people say, right? and they internalize everything as being so factual, but in reality, they are the opinions of others, and they don't know what to do with those things because they haven't understood that they're not true, right? And so we do a long time and a long understanding of in the moment determining or deciphering from what is fact or fiction because you, Catherine, you don't like, and I'm sure you understand like when I said that, but the numbers of the shift of what that looks like and how they understand it and what they feel like and what a tool that is, right? For them to
Oh,
know
yeah.
what that is magnificent.
Yeah. Yeah, we speak the same vocabulary on a lot of things. I find that quite interesting.
Yeah.
Um, so this audience that possibly listens to this is both parents and caregivers, or people who are working with
Mhm.
young children and
Yeah.
young men. And
Yeah.
many of us in that realm are trying to make the world a little bit better for our little boys so they grow up to be happier,
Hmm.
compassionate young men. And so that, the little boys can really thrive instead of merely surviving childhood, basically.
Yeah.
So for that kind of a person who is listening, whether it's a parent who is with a
Hmm.
young boy and trying to do their best, or it's a young man who's struggling, those two different scenarios, what's your opinion of something that would really make a difference?
Don't focus so much on the presence of physical growth. I know that for caretakers, whether it's teachers, or whether it's parents, or whether it is mental health providers, we focus so much on our goals for them. And a lot of times they haven't had the time to be asked what their goals are and truly what the measure for them is for growth is a lot of times is if you can understand what their goals are and assist them to get to their goals versus only placing your expectations on them, right? Yeah, your expectations aren't the only things that matter, right? Because a lot of times it's like if you're a teacher, right, for example, it's like if you're a teacher and if your expectation is for them to pass this test or learn this skill, right? A softer skill may be a more appropriate goal for them is to learn how to verbalize why they're having so much issue or so many issues of attaining what it looks like to achieve that goal, right? And then oftentimes understanding and achieve can help you in instructing them to achieve the hard goal of passing the test, right? But it's that collaboration effort between you and them.
I think sometimes it's a very hard position for parents who have really they have the best intentions,
Mhm.
and
Yeah,
they think if they can help support their son to do A, B, or C, then
yeah,
they will, have a better future. But maybe
sure,
that A, B, C has nothing to do with what their son really wants. So
sure.
it's a hard place for parents as well.
Yeah. We have this expectation of as many hard goals as possible will equate to their success. Well, there's actually several studies that show that the people that are the most successful now are the people that have the highest amount of emotional
Yeah.
intelligence because those are the people that are in rooms that create the highest amount of conversation that are leaders, right? Because they are working with teams to establish rapport between several people at the same time or tens of people at the same time, right? Without having emotional intelligence, it is impossible to instruct a team in leadership, right? Yeah. So, yeah, those studies are so true, right? It's not so much what you've accomplished, but what you can encourage your team or a team that you're over to lead themselves into, right?
But what do you think is the best thing that your mother did that helped you become, as solid and grounded and of service that you are now.
My mother always told me to remember there's a couple of things, right? She used to always say, remember who you are and remember whose you are. But then you also have to understand before that is she gave me a good image of understanding that I could do anything that I wanted to do, right? Like even when I was struggling and going through mental health crisis, she's I always had a good understanding that there wasn't anything that I couldn't achieve, right? Yeah. So there is that. And then I think more than anything, my mom gave me examples of being just strength and strong, right? Like one of the most pivotal examples that I can give you is when I was 6 or 7 or 8. I was in second grade and I attended my very first mom and me camp out for Boy Scout and for Cub Scouts, right? And I have the most flat feet in the world. They're actually documented by two podiatrists as being the flattest feet that they had worked on at that point in time to date, right? And so I lost all of strength and ability to walk. I could not walk at all, right? My feet, my tendonitis was so crazy. But watching her be so patient with me and not frustrated, and that woman physically carried me in her arms throughout the whole entire rest of the campsite, right? And there's just moments like that that allow me to understand what it looks like to be patient and understand what it looks like to look at things slowly instead of looking things on surface level what is going on, but what is truly going on internally, right? Yeah, so I think watching my mom work slowly in circumstances has given me the example of what it looks like to be strong and empowering for others, but do it slowly.
One of the last thing that I just wanted to just, talk a little bit about was what got me on this path was realizing that someday some woman might be afraid of my son, not
Mm,
for what he was wearing, what he was doing, what he was saying, simply because he was male.
yeah,
I've also read, I can't remember what his name is. I'm sure you would know, but I read a book written by a black man who was a journalist, I believe, and it was Letters to My Son. And it
yes,
was about growing, like a young man growing up and the things that he would need to be mindful of.
yeah,
And like I think moms are powerful. Like
yeah,
they are powerful influences. But I honestly don't think most women have that understanding of what what that must feel like to be a young man where it's the first thing that people think is that it causes fear, could cause fear, that you are perhaps someone that the other half of the human race needs to be protected from.
yeah,
And that just
yeah,
kind of it when you think of it in general, it's kind of easy to let that thought go. But
yeah,
when you think of it about your child, who you
right,
know is the sweetest, gentlest, kindest, person,
yeah,
and that's something someone might think simply because he's male, that unconscious
yeah,
gender bias is a real thorn.
yes. That's a that's a deep thought process, specifically for me, due to social, now what is considered social normalcy in this where I live is there's very much a stance of verbiage that is hateful towards men from women because of them going through their healing journey, right? And having to listen to that and the implications of what it has done to society is a little, oh, it's heavy. It is.
Yeah.
It's truly heavy, right? Yeah, it is. It really is. And so to prepare young men for that judgment comes with a lot of stillness. Also, to make sure that I say the right things and not the wrong things is really important. Yeah, that's a deep topic. I don't know where you experienced that from and what it's like where you're at. It's a little crazy here.
Yes, I personally can't imagine raising a child, period, whether it's a little boy or a little
Yeah,
girl in the States at the
yeah,
moment, but especially if it was a boy. And
yeah, yeah. I will say this. What's super cool about it for me is I get, I mean, sometimes, like, even because I do trauma workshops, right? And so sometimes I do have the opportunity to dismantle those belief systems
yeah,
by simply being a presence of a man that is trustworthy, right? And so that is also always a really humbling thing. And to like just to be a trauma public educator, because women are the loudest about trauma where I'm at, right? Factual thing. And to be in that place of giving education is really honoring and humbling to get invited time after time and again in those places and give really practical information from the heart and from the head and from the gut and from lived experience and clinical experience about what that is a really cool thing. Now to give information and wisdom to young men about what that looks like, because then you get into the dynamics personally of individually of if they just like is sexual trauma there, right? Is physical abuse there, right? Is like, and then those things get really dynamic as well. And so then the information and the wisdom that they give that you give them, that right?
well,
Yeah.
I think the work that you do is really important, and that's why I really was really keen to talk to you because, you know, things are changing, but
Yes.
there's so much that needs to be done. But to me, I think the biggest thing is that when there's people, whether it's someone like you or someone like me, someone that says, "I see you,
Yeah.
I want to hear your voice is important to me," and honestly, to say it's not your fault. Society
Yeah.
kind of sucks. So,
Yeah.
you
Yeah.
know, they, I think,
Yeah.
I think they need to hear that more. I know even like with our
Yes.
son through school, because education is not kind to little boys. And that's my area. I was in
No.
education my whole life, but it's
Yeah,
not kind to
that's a big
boys.
topic. That's a
It is.
huge topic. Yeah, because
It
then you look
is.
at yeah, because then you like even from my perspective, well, it's education is not ever education hasn't been kind to young boys for the longest time.
Mm-hmm.
Then specifically, you're looking at where I deal with is neurodivergent diagnosis, right? And
Yeah.
the number of accurate diagnoses that exist there and where the tipping scale is from boy to girl or girl to boy, right? That's wild, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
But I think it
It's,
has to make a difference when a boy, like I hope it made a difference for, for our son, but hearing that there's nothing wrong with you. The system
hmm
is not meeting
hmm
the way you learn, the way you thrive, but it's not
yeah,
you. And I don't think people hear that. I don't think boys hear that very often. And so the educational system can do quite a lot of damage to their self-esteem. So
Yeah.
the more people that actually talk about the emotional world of boys and men, the more we're going to learn, and then the more we're going to be able to be a little more compassionate and understanding.
Yes. I absolutely agree. Right. I also think it benefits the world to know how to do that. A lot of times people hear things that they think are a good idea, and they just jump on the bandwagon, yada yada. But they do it poorly. And so when they do it poorly, it causes a cultural influx of doing things poorly with specific demographics or all the demographics. Kind of like give you an example. I hope this is okay. I'll give you an example is when I used to work with substance use, I had a young man who walked in and said, "This feels good and I like it." And so because he said, "It feels good and I like it," there was a really cool aspect of the whole entire facility that walked around saying, "It feels good and I like it, and it feels good and I'm like it." But what's so funny is one specific thing that feels good to them and they like it is drugs. And so what they were doing is chanting or uplifting that thing without the proper education or without the proper awareness of what to do with it, right? And cultures do that all the time. It's kind of like the proverbial 6-7 that was popular, right, with
Yeah.
kids. And so kids all over the world are saying 6-7, and then they stop saying it. And then when they're done with it, they've done more damage than good because they used it inappropriately, right?
But
So sometimes
Casey,
we spend time undoing things.
yeah, it's
Yeah.
just too bad that men have to go through some of that, and then have it unlearned. Wouldn't it just
Yeah.
be a better place if they didn't have to have that trauma in the first place?
Uh-huh. Yeah. It's very true.
Casey, before we finish today, is there anything that we didn't talk about that you wish we had of?
No, I don't think so. I think so. I don't think so at all. I think I've enjoyed this conversation and enjoyed it in the openness that it's been, in the honesty that it's been. It's been good.
Thank you. I have too.
Yeah.
Where can people find your work? Like, you have a lot of really good things going on, and tell people where they can find
Which
you or
is my
connect with you.
my website, which is my name, which is CASEYMUZE.com, CaseyMuse.com. There is fine. And Facebook is Casey Muse, the royal speaker. And yeah,
Okay. Well, I encourage people to look into it because I know I did, and I was very impressed with some of the things that you offer, and just looking into some of the things that you write about, and it's just good food for thought. I think it's important for people to get different people's thinking about things so that you can kind of bubble
mhm,
up yourself and grow and in that way.
yeah,
I know how precious time is, and I do hope that you feel I've honored yours today. And it really has been a pleasure for me to have the opportunity to speak with you, Casey. Thank you.
yeah, absolutely, absolutely, Catherine. Thank you for your time, and I look forward to our conversation again at some point.
Me too.
Yeah,
And thank you to the listeners for joining us on Unlocking the Parenting Code, all about boys. Be sure to check out Casey's links in the show notes, and don't forget to subscribe, share, and tune in next time for more conversations about boys and men. Thank you for sharing your time with me today. Every conversation we have here is a step toward raising boys who feel seen, heard, and deeply valued. If you're looking for more support on this journey, I invite you to visit me at sonhoodcoaching.com. You'll find a link in the show notes. And as always, thank you for being part of this important movement. Until next time, take good care.